Welcome to the Daily Report on Friday, May 16th. I'm Lindsey Reiser. Major setback. The Supreme Court is blocking the Trump administration from deporting Venezuelan men detained in Texas under the Alien Enemies Act. Plus, President Trump's budget package hits a hurdle in the House. The demands from a handful of Republicans preventing the legislation from moving forward.
Well, the noes have it. The committee stands in recess, subject to the call of the chair.
The so-called big, beautiful bill just failed to clear the House Budget Committee.
The proposed bill includes cuts to Medicaid and food stamps as part of an effort to slash spending by at least $880 billion to help pay for tax cuts.
All of us are very disappointed with the progress or lack of that was made. I'm done with smoke and mirrors.
Ukrainian and Russian officials held direct talks for the first time in 3 years.
And while there had been buildup about this week's talks between Russia and Ukraine and Turkey, President Trump signaled he wasn't optimistic about a breakthrough.
Look, nothing's going to happen until Putin and I get together.
When do we want it? Now! Who are we? Locomotive engineers.
Union Transit engineers for the nation's third largest commuter railroad started striking over pay raises.
This is the first walkout of its kind at New Jersey Transit in more than 40 years.
It is frankly a mess of their own making, and it is a slap in the face of every commuter and worker who relies on NJ Transit.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. The Supreme Court is blocking President Trump from invoking a centuries-old wartime law known as the Alien Enemies Act to deport Venezuelan migrants held in the Northern District of Texas. In a 7-2 decision, the justices on Friday moved to temporarily block the deportations while a group of migrants challenged the president's use of the law in court. Conservative-leaning Justices Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas dissented. The administration may still cite other immigration laws to deport migrants, just not the Alien Enemies Act. In its ruling, the High Court says migrant detainees have not gotten adequate notice to challenge their deportations. However, the justices did not weigh in on the underlying merits of the case. The court's written order reads, quote, "To be clear, we decide today only that the detainees are entitled to more notice than was given." The order goes on to say, quote, "We recognize the significance of the government's national security interests, as well as the necessity that such interests be pursued in a manner consistent with the Constitution." Back in March, President Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act to send hundreds of Venezuelans to El Salvador's mega prison. The U.S. is paying El Salvador millions of dollars to house those deportees. President Trump appeared to respond to the ruling Friday, writing on Truth Social, quote, "The Supreme Court won't allow us to get criminals out of our country." CBS News legal contributor and Loyola Law School professor Jessica Levinson is here for more analysis on this decision. And CBS News Justice Department correspondent Scott McFarland is in Washington as well. Jess, let's start with you. Break down this ruling for us.
So the court, as you said, did not rule on the merits. What the court did is send this back to the Fifth Circuit and with some directions. And the directions that the court gave by a 7-2 ruling here was basically Fifth Circuit, go back, look at whether or not there's enough notice that's being given to people. We don't think there is. And now evaluate whether or not a preliminary injunction can be in place. Look at the potential success of these claims. So really do get to the substance of this. This is a ruling both based on notice, which is a process issue, and also based on substance, saying we think that that you need to do some serious weighing of the potential burdens and benefits of implementing the Alien Enemies Act for the first time during peacetime. Of course, there were also some divisions in the ranks, but to me, that was the big takeaway from the order is go back to the Fifth Circuit, have them evaluate the preliminary injunction, and have them look at what amount of notice is enough. 24 hours is not.
So Justice Kavanaugh said in a separate concurring opinion that instead of sending it back to the appeals court, the justices should just decide on this now. What was his reasoning?
His reasoning is this is timely. He said, given everything that's going on, essentially given the fact that he thinks there are exigent circumstances, he says basically, let's not let this ping pong throughout the federal system. Let's just take it. Let's just decide on the merits, and let's provide lower courts with a ruling on whether or not you can use the Alien Enemies Act to deport this Venezuelan gang during, again, peacetime. We know that the Alien Enemies Act has only been used 3 times in our nation's history. all during wartime. And Justice Kavanaugh is ready to make a determination about whether or not it can be used for a fourth time.
How quickly do you expect the Fifth Circuit to weigh in?
I know. I don't know. I mean, I know everybody wants to know that. We have the Supreme Court saying, go back, do your job. That tends to weigh heavily on Court of Appeals judges' minds when the Supreme Court says, I need you to look at this. So I'm going to use words like all deliberate speed or pretty quickly. I'm not going to use words like 3 days or 3 weeks.
What can you tell us about Alito and Thomas's dissents?
So what they said, number one, is they don't think that there's jurisdiction. And what that means, and this is going to sound a little detailed, is that the way this case came up to the Supreme Court was not the typical appellate process. And what they're saying is that the order that was appealed up to the court, they don't actually have the power to hear an appeal of that order. Then they also went on to say that they're not sure that there should be a preliminary injunction in this case. And that really gets to their view of the merits, meaning it seems like they are at least giving a nod to the idea that they think that the administration can, at this point, use that statute, use the Alien Enemies Act in order to deport people. So I think what we're beginning to see on the very broadest level is this 7-2 division in the court on this issue of using the Alien Enemies Act. Again, not a ruling on the merits, not a ruling on the substance yet.
Jessica Levinson, we appreciate you. Let's bring in CBS News Justice Department correspondent Scott McFarland. Scott, you weigh in. What else can you tell us about this decision?
I can tell you I learned a lot from Professor Levinson right there.
She took us to school.
She really did. I think the overall political climate should not be ignored here. There is this multi-front battle now happening in the courts and the Trump administration over immigration and those March 15th Alien Enemies Act deportations, which have caused so many controversies and caused so many individual lawsuits across the country. But for the plaintiffs in these cases, it has to feel like they're running not in mud, but in quicksand. They can't progress the cases. And I want to get ahead of you here, Lindsey, but there was this symmetrical hearing about 10 miles away from the Supreme Court today in Greenbelt, Maryland, over that case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. That's one of those deportees from March 15th who the administration acknowledges was mistakenly deported to El Salvador, a country from which he has court protection from ever being deported, a country he fled years earlier. And the judge there, the federal judge, expressed some pretty clear frustration. She wasn't getting answers from the administration to baseline questions about that case. The judge, federal judge Paula Zinnes, ordered Abrego Garcia's return to U.S. custody weeks ago. It hasn't happened. They're still going back and forth over the production of evidence. That's why it might feel, in that case, like it's stuck in quicksand.
Also, Scott, CBS News has learned that former FBI Director James Comey is being interviewed by Secret Service agents Friday after his post on Thursday, which he deleted on Instagram. It was a photo of seashells that said 8647. Some in the administration were saying a call for violence against the president. What's the latest there?
Yeah, a conversation or interview, if you will, between the Secret Service and somebody who's on their radar, not uncommon. This was to be expected in short order. The social media post, which James Comey deleted, has ratcheted up criticisms of the Trump administration's Department of Justice for not going harder after or against people who were in the FBI and who were accused of being weaponized or biased against President Trump. So the 8647 is being viewed as 86 means take out or take down or get rid of, and 47 being the 47th president. Whether that's a threat or criminal, it's a whole different matter. But there's already been, Lindsey, this building pressure on the Justice Department to be more assertive, resourceful, and ambitious with how it investigates its own FBI agents who are viewed as deep state, or its former agents and leader, James Comey. And James Comey, with his social media post, has just fanned those flames and put himself right there in the middle of it.
An overnight court filing from a group of FBI employees has asked a judge to order the Justice Department to destroy its list of the 5,000 plus employees who were part of the January 6th Capitol riot investigation. What can you tell us?
Yeah, don't forget about that matter. Early in the administration, the then Deputy Attorney General ordered the FBI to hand over the names of 5,000 plus agency employees who were part of that Capitol insurrection investigation for review. Some of the agents on that list worry the list was made for retaliation and retribution. They've just asked a court to order the destruction of the list and order it never be publicized or leaked because of the words of a man named Ed Martin. Lindsey, Ed Martin's a former U.S. attorney in D.C., a Trump appointee, who's now going to run a weaponization task force inside the Department of Justice. They say Ed Martin has said things that makes them think he is going to try to name and shame January 6th FBI agents, even though those agents were just following orders to investigate the case, and even though, Lindsey, nobody has laid a glove in court on any misconduct by the FBI in January 6 cases.
More to come. Scott McFarland, thank you. The fate of President Trump's budget bill is in jeopardy. The bill failed to pass a key congressional committee. Several hardline conservatives say it doesn't make deep enough cuts to federal spending. Republicans are looking to cut more than $800 billion to help pay for President Trump's extended tax cuts. The current version of the bill includes cuts to Medicaid and food stamps. Let's bring in CBS News congressional correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns. Caitlin, Republican Congressman Jody Arrington, the House Budget Committee chair, spoke to reporters after the bill failed. Let's listen.
I think it provides clarity, better clarity on where people stand, what their positions are. I also think that calling a vote moves the process forward. I think it's an action-forcing catalyst.
So why did these conservatives vote no, and what happens now?
Yeah, Lindsey, the president's big, beautiful bill has certainly hit a big speed bump with this not passing through committee. And this wasn't entirely a shock to the system. In fact, you saw Jody Arrington there in response to my question, which was, did this at all surprise you? And why did you bring this up for a vote in the first place? And his argument was, you have to have some kind of deadline to get people moving here. So they are set to reconvene on Sunday night at 10 p.m., Lindsey, appointment viewing on C-SPAN. But really, there are some major sticking points that conservative lawmakers on this committee have. And not to get too into the weeds, but one of them has to do with Medicaid. This bill puts in new work requirements for those who can sign up for Medicaid. But it doesn't phase that in until a couple of years from now, until the end of President Trump's term. And so these lawmakers want that phased in almost immediately, faster. And so that's just one of the sticking points here. They want much deeper cuts than what they are seeing in this bill. So the question is, over the weekend, whether there is any movement, any conversations that bear fruit in terms of getting those conservatives on board just to pass this through committee.
There's another faction that you've been talking about all week of Republicans who are concerned about the SALT cap. Can you explain what that is and what their point is?
That's right. As we've been kind of joking all weekend, this doesn't have to do with the condiment of salt that you put on your food. It's the state and local tax deduction. In the first iteration of this tax bill that passed several years ago, the Trump tax cuts, in order to help pay for a lot of it, they put a cap on state and local tax deductions at about $10,000. And that really affected more high-income states, California, New York, for example. Those states also, Lindsey, happen to have several more moderate Republican members in key battleground districts who argue that Republicans wouldn't even have the majority in the House without them. They want a higher cap. Now, this bill raises that cap to about $30,000, and these lawmakers want a little bit more. So that's a sticking point there. I say all of this to mean that we're just talking right now about the Budget Committee and those conservatives. We haven't even gotten to these concerns that the moderates have and when they can voice those. So right now in the Budget Committee, it's the conservative sticking points that are holding it up. Even if it passes through the committee on Monday, gets to a floor vote next week, you still have those moderate members wanting higher caps on those SALT deductions. So we'll see whether they can get there. Long story short, big hurdles still remain.
And we haven't even talked about the Senate. Caitlin Huey-Burns, thanks so much. President Trump is returning to the White House Friday evening after wrapping up his 4-day trip to the Middle East, which included stops in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. Speaking to reporters on Air Force One, President Trump praised the leaders of those countries after a trip marked by business deals and lavish state dinners.
That was a great 4 days. I think it was a historic 4 days in all three countries. You can't speak more highly. The job they've done is, in a fairly short period of time, is just outstanding. And they're great people, great leaders, 3 great leaders.
Finn Gomez joins us now, the executive director for CBS News White House and politics coverage. Finn, thanks so much for being here. How much of the trip was about business? How much was about diplomacy?
Yeah, Lindsay, I did speak to some senior White House officials earlier today who say that this trip was focused primarily on economic agreements, yes, but they think that through those agreements, through what they accomplished, and what the president said, it's something that could happen, could be as much as, agreements in the trillions, that this is the power of diplomacy, by going through these avenues and not the non-traditional ones, because they're making agreements with key Arab leaders in a very key part of the world. So speaking to the White House, they say it was a huge success because of these agreements. However, we do know Bloomberg has reported that some senior administration officials are seeking to slow down these deals because there are concerns that the U.S. hasn't imposed sufficient guardrails, vetted these deals to prevent some of the American chips, specifically shipped to the Gulf, from ultimately benefiting China, which, as you know, Lindsay, has some pretty deep ties in this region. So there's still some concern by some members, according to these reports, members of the administration, that it may not be fully vetted. But of course, overall, the White House is championing these deals because of these key economic agreements.
While the president was still in the UAE, he spoke about the next steps on tariffs. Let's listen.
We have, at the same time, 150 countries that want to make a deal, but you're not able to see that many countries. So at a certain point over the next 2 to 3 weeks, I think Scott and Howard will be sending letters out, essentially telling people, it would be very fair, but we'll be telling people what they'll be paying to do business in the United States.
Where do we go from here?
Well, I mean, if you look at the Moody's ratings, the breaking news from earlier, just a little while ago, that they have downgraded the United States by a notch to AA1 from AAA, citing rising debt and interest. In part, I think some detractors are pointing to these tariffs as something that is really exacerbating the situation. However, again, if you talk to the senior, I spoke to some senior administration officials earlier today who really think that they still have the tariffs really allow them leverage in continuing the president's economic policies and to continuing really the foreign policy through these constructs to allow for the United States to make more of an impact and have more leverage in making these deals that will benefit the United States. However, it's still 150 countries. We'll see what happens there. That's a lot of countries. That really hasn't proven how much they've actually accomplished with these companies, respectively. So there's really still a wait-and-see approach here, Lindsay, to what will actually be accomplished with these tariffs.
Finn Gomez, thank you so much. Multiple prisoners are on the run in Louisiana. What local authorities are saying about how the inmates escaped and the possibility this was an inside job. Plus,
it is a slap in the face of every commuter and worker who relies on NJ Transit.
Thousands of people navigate a full day of New Jersey Transit's first strike in more than 40 years, when the transportation system and union representing engineers will head back to the negotiating table. You're watching the Daily Report. A manhunt is underway for multiple inmates who escaped from a New Orleans jail Friday morning. Local officials said they're all considered armed and dangerous. So far, just one inmate has been captured. CBS News reporter Katie Weiss has the latest from New Orleans.
I'm standing right outside the Orleans Parish Sheriff's Office, right just near the iconic French Quarter in downtown New Orleans. We're just maybe about a 10-minute drive away. And this is some pretty bizarre and rare news that we're hearing today from this scene. We know now that 10 prisoners from this prison here broke out of jail early this morning. 9 of them are still on the run. One was apprehended, seen cowering in a hotel garage underneath with a car, we're told. We also are told that this is still very much a fluid situation and that officials are still looking in to find out exactly what happened, combing through surveillance videos, things of that nature. But the details in how these people got away is pretty remarkable. For one, we're told that somehow these prisoners were able to get a hold of power tools and utilize those tools to take out a toilet. We also know that there were concerns with the locks on the jail cell doors and that these locks on these doors have been defective for quite some time, for years. For the 5 years that the sheriff has been in office, she says she's been asking for money to be able to fix those defective locks and still has not been able to get that amount of money that she needed. So still many questions at this time as to, what may have gone wrong and why there are still 9 criminals on the loose. We're going to continue to keep you updated, but for now, we'll send it back to you.
Katie Weiss, thank you. The union representing New Jersey transit rail engineers will meet with negotiators Sunday to work toward ending the transit strike. Governor Phil Murphy said Thursday he supports the union, but their demands could ultimately hurt the state. CBS News New York reporter Christine Sloan has the latest.
I, for one, refuse to pass the buck or increase taxes on hard-working New Jerseyans for the same or even more likely reduced service. That's not going to happen.
New Jersey's governor speaking at the Aberdeen-Matawan train station in Monmouth County, where locomotive engineers stood on the picket line. The tracks they operate empty after walking off the job shortly after midnight Friday.
It's hard for everybody. You haven't had a raise in 5 years. We're just looking to survive living in this state.
The 400 or so engineers won't be getting paid, but say they're standing their ground.
Is this going to be tough for you in terms of financially?
It could be. I have a 7-month-old at home and a mortgage like everyone else. My wife's been laid off because of school budget issues, so it could be tough.
The governor, who says he's a union guy, releasing pictures of himself shaking the hands of union members on the picket line. The Democrat says the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen made a deal back in March that would have given them almost the same wages as LIRR engineers, but walked away from it. The union's president says his members are making $10 less an hour than their counterparts in the tri-state area.
They're shifting the blame, right? So they're trying to say that we're going to make them go up on fares. They've got plenty of money. They spent $500 million on office building. So they have the money. They're just not willing to give it to the engineers.
NJ Transit CEO says giving the union higher wages would initiate what's called a Me Too clause, forcing the agency to pay other unions the same pay hike.
This is not about not giving them a fair wage. It's about how do you do it in a fiscally responsible manner that doesn't bankrupt New Jersey Transit and puts it on a debt spiral like every other mass transit agency.
Russia and Ukraine hold their first direct peace talks in 3 years, but they didn't even last 2 hours. What the two sides were able to agree on and the issues they remain far apart on. You're watching The Daily Report. Welcome back to The Daily Report. I'm Lindsey Reiser. Here are some additions to our top stories. R&B singer Chris Brown will remain in custody in the UK until next month after he was charged for an alleged attack in 2023. The 36-year-old is accused of hitting someone with a bottle at a nightclub in London. The singer is supposed to begin the European leg of his tour on June 8th. His next hearing is June 13th. The Food and Drug Administration has approved a first-of-its-kind blood test to detect Alzheimer's disease in patients. Health officials say the test will be able to reliably detect certain plaques that are associated with the brain disorder. The FDA says the test could reduce the need for more invasive detection methods, such as a spinal tap. The Japanese company behind the blood test says it's already widely available in U.S. clinical labs. Two of the largest cable companies in the U.S. have agreed to merge in a $34.5 billion deal. The deal between Charter Communications and Cox Communications still needs approval from Charter shareholders and regulators. Charter, which is more widely known as Spectrum, has more than 32 million customers, while Cox has more than 6.5 million. Many cable companies have been looking for ways to stay successful and competitive in the age of streaming. For the first time since the conflict between Russia and Ukraine began in 2022, the two countries held direct peace talks. Talks lasted under 2 hours and ended with no deal to stop the fighting yet. The two sides did agree to each hand over 1,000 prisoners of war and to develop new proposals for a potential ceasefire, according to Ukraine's defense minister. But on the same day as these talks, Russia launched a drone strike in Ukraine's Odessa region, damaging homes and leaving 3 people wounded, according to the local governor. Joining me now is Ambassador William Taylor. He's the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine and is a distinguished fellow at the Atlantic Council. Ambassador, thanks for being here. We weren't expecting major breakthroughs without Putin and Zelensky there. Secretary of State Rubio said as much, and there weren't any. What's your take on these talks and where things go from here?
Well, where they go from here, Lindsey, is pressure on Putin to get serious about negotiations. As you've indicated, they were not serious. Putin sent a lower level delegation there to Istanbul. The Ukrainians were there, as you say. President Zelensky was there in the country. He was ready to join if Putin were to show up. I believe President Trump was pretty clear that he would be ready to join if Putin showed up. So essentially, Putin stiffed both Zelensky and Trump. And so the way we go forward is for the Europeans and the Americans to put pressure on President Putin to come to the table and negotiate seriously.
What does that pressure look like?
Pressure looks like a couple of things. One is economic pressure. I mean, there are sanctions. In fact, the Europeans, in coordination with President Trump last weekend, said that if Putin doesn't come to the table, that they would put economic sanctions on the oil sector and on the banking sector. And these sanctions can have a real effect, and Putin knows it. Putin responded by trying to divert that, suggesting these meetings in Turkey on Thursday in an attempt to try to get out of these sanctions. So the first thing to get pressure on Putin are these sanctions, and they should go on right now. I mean, he's clearly not negotiating seriously, so they go on. The second thing is to make it very clear that the United States and Europe will continue to provide Ukraine with the weapons and ammunition it needs to defend itself. Those two messages, both the military and the economic, will be pressure on Putin.
Do you think that either of those possibilities from the current administration are likely, given what we have heard from President Trump and members of the administration, that unless they see progress soon, they're going to have to reevaluate how involved we as a country are in this?
So, Lindsey, I'm not convinced that they will walk away. In fact, I don't think they will walk away from this. They have made it very clear, the administration has made very clear that this issue, that the Russian invasion of Ukraine is their top foreign policy initiative, priority. They're not going to walk away from this. And that there's good indications that the U.S. Treasury Department is under President Trump preparing these sanctions. By the way, Senator Lindsey Graham, has more than 70 co-sponsors on a bill in the Senate to put serious sanctions on Russia. I have to believe that's coordinated with the White House. So I think the answer is yes, they're going to stay engaged. I think they know how to put pressure on Putin, and I think that's the next step.
Without sanctions, what incentive does Putin have to come to the table?
Putin knows he's under pressure. Putin is much weaker now, Lindsey, than he was in the first Trump administration. And frankly, President Trump has more leverage on Putin this time than he did before. And so there is that leverage that Trump has. There's the economic pressure that could come. The message is also on the weapons. The State Department just last week notified Congress of 2 new weapons packages that are coming. So this pressure, as I say, both on the military side and on the economic side, appears to be coming. There is a shift, I believe, in U.S. administration policy in favor of Ukraine and in opposition to Putin, who is clearly the one holding up these negotiations. And I think the patience of this administration, President Trump on down, is wearing thin.
Ambassador William Taylor, thank you.
Thank you, Lindsey.
President Trump's planned military parade in Washington, D.C. is set to cost between $25 to $45 million, according to an Army spokesperson. It would include about 6,600 soldiers, 7 bands, 50 helicopters, and 150 vehicles. The parade would be part of the U.S. Army's 250th anniversary celebration and would take place on June 14th, President Trump's 79th birthday. When asked about the price tag, President Trump said in a recent interview with NBC's Meet the Press, the cost is, quote, peanuts compared to the value of doing it. President Trump's interest in the pageantry of a military parade dates back years. Democratic lawmakers have blasted the idea as self-aggrandizing. An undocumented woman living in Florida is facing a nearly $2 million fine for failing to leave the country. The individual, who CBS News has chosen not to name, has been charged $500 for each day she's stayed in the U.S. since being issued a removal order in April of 2005. That's according to a notice from Immigration and Customs Enforcement's Civil Fines Department. The Trump administration in February announced plans to penalize those living in the U.S. illegally under the 1952 Immigration and Nationality Act. The rarely enforced law lets the U.S. impose fines on undocumented immigrants and requires they register with the federal government. The man convicted of stabbing author Salman Rushdie in 2022 was sentenced to 25 years in prison Friday. 27-year-old Hadi Matar was found guilty of attempted murder and assault in February. Rushdie did not appear in court Friday, but said in an impact statement he believed he was dying after being stabbed. The attack occurred on a New York lecture stage and left the author blind in one eye. Matar is set to appear in a separate federal trial on terrorism-related charges. A date for the next trial has not been set. Sean Diddy Combs' defense attorneys finished their cross-examination of his ex-girlfriend Cassie Ventura Friday. We want to warn you, some details in this report may be disturbing. Combs' lawyers said evidence shown to the jury this week shows a, quote, glimpse into a complex but decade-long consensual relationship. However, the 38-year-old singer on Friday accused Combs of raping her in 2018. Outside the Manhattan courthouse, Ventura's lawyers read a statement from his client.
This week has been extremely challenging, but also remarkably empowering and healing for me. I hope that my testimony has given strength and a voice to other survivors and can help others who have suffered to speak up and also heal from abuse and fear.
Singer Dawn Richard, who was also called to the stand Friday, will continue her testimony Monday. CBS News legal reporter Katrina Koppen has been following the case in court all week. Katrina?
Yeah, that's right. Cassie Ventura is off the stand after days of very difficult testimony. After she was done, her lawyer came outside the courthouse and read a statement from her. She said, "The more I heal, the more I can remember. And the more I can remember, the more I can never forget." He also read a statement from her husband, who asked for privacy as she is about to have their third child. We then heard from another witness, Dawn Richard, who was in two groups that were signed to Bad Boy Records, including one that Sean Combs was in called Diddy Dirty Money. It was her, Kalina Harper, and Sean Combs. She told the story of an incident at his home. She was there, Cassie Ventura was there, and she witnessed him beating Ventura. She then saw him drag her upstairs. They didn't call law enforcement at the time. She wasn't sure how to handle the situation, but Combs called her and Kalina Harper back to the house the next day. He said it was to record. He brought them into the recording studio, locked the door, and told them that it was in their best interest not to say something about what had happened. He told her, people can go missing if they talk. And then he then gave them flowers. Back to you.
Katrina Koppen, thank you. The Food and Drug Administration says it is planning to review its approval of a so-called yoga mat chemical that's been banned in Europe but can be a bread ingredient in the U.S. The agency previously approved it to whiten cereal flour and improve baking bread dough, but advocacy groups have raised concerns about its potential health risks. For more on this and other health news, let's bring in CBS News digital reporter Alex Tan. Alex, what are the concerns with this so-called yoga mat ingredient?
Yeah, so this ingredient, which is called ADA for short, I'm not going to try to pronounce the longer name because I did not do too well in chemistry when I was in college, but ADA was a bread ingredient that is used in the United States, essentially, as you said, to improve bread flour, sometimes used to improve cereal as well. There is some concern in other countries that when this ingredient is used in flour, it can break down into another chemical that, for short, is called SEM. I'm not going to try to pronounce the long name for that either, which might cause cancer. That's actually why Europe, many, many years ago, said that they would not allow the use of this chemical in bread in their country. In the United States, they have said that their studies, this is according to the FDA a few years ago, found that the amount of this chemical that was showing up in the food supply as a result of the baking process was too small, they thought, to actually cause a cancer risk. But as you said, We are now hearing from the FDA that they're planning on reopening their investigation into this chemical, as well as two others, BHA and BHT, which have also long been the focus of a lot of concern from advocacy groups, as well as some of Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s allies before he became the Secretary of Health and Human Services.
Alex, we said we were going to go through a lot of health headlines with you, so let's talk the current measles outbreak. The U.S. is already nearing 2019's total number of measles cases. We're just in the middle of May. What's the latest?
Yeah, that's right. You know, there's some good news here and there's some bad news. We'll start with the bad news. You know, the reality is this puts us only 250 cases away from topping the total number of cases reported for all of 2019. The reason that this worries public health experts so much is that people might recall that 2019 was the worst year of measles in U.S. history since the 1990s. That was before measles was eliminated, thanks in large part to vaccinations. So that's the bad news. The good news is there are some signs that this year's measles outbreak is now slowing. We have seen some decreases in the pace of new cases reported. That's even accounting for the reporting delays you often see during measles outbreaks. But of course, just to put a caveat on that, public health officials are still worried that some of those measles cases could continue to show up. Some of these outbreaks could get worse. And we are still only just now seeing what the potential impact might have been from that Easter travel we saw last month. Just a reminder, it can take 2 to 3 weeks for those measles cases to be diagnosed, to be reported to health authorities, and to show up in these figures.
Wow. President Trump is looking to tie drug prices in the U.S. to what is paid in other countries. And you recently learned why President Biden dropped his attempt to do the same thing. What did you find?
Yeah, that's right. You know, folks might remember that just earlier this week, President Trump said that he wanted to revive his so-called most favored nations policy, essentially trying to find a way to force drug makers to tie the prices they were charging here in the United States to the same prices that are being charged in other developed countries overseas, which are significantly lower. We heard that during the Biden administration, there were actually talks in Congress to do this exact same type of thing as part of the Inflation Reduction Act that gave Medicare the ability to negotiate drug prices. But that part of the proposal was dropped in Congress, we found out, because of concerns that Senate Democrat staff had that the moderates within their party, people like Senators Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona at the time, or Bob Menendez of New Jersey, that they would not be able to sign on to the bill if this clause was in it. So they instead changed to a different formula that's now what Medicare is using to negotiate drug prices. But to put it in a long story short, this is a proposal that has been floating around in D.C. for a long time, and we've often heard Democrats say that they wish it could have been in the law had they had a chance to do it again.
All right, Alex Tin, thank you.
Thank you.
Putting your phone away at the movies may soon be a thing of the past. The new chatbot that actually encourages you to use your phone in theaters. You're watching The Daily Report. Using your phone has always been a no-no in movie theaters, right? But moviegoers could soon be encouraged to use them to interact with chatbots. The New York Times reports earlier this month, Meta teamed up with horror studio Blumhouse, which is owned by Universal Pictures, to introduce its new technology called Movie Mate. So this chatbot would give people access to exclusive movie trivia and real-time interactions synced with the film. According to data from consulting firm National Research Group, 20% of moviegoers ages 6 to 17 already send messages during films. Meta hopes that relaxing rules banning phone use in theaters will bring people back to the movies. For more, let's bring in the author of that report, Brooks Barnes. He's a reporter for the New York Times covering all things Hollywood. I mean, it kind of sounds like pop-up video, but in the palm of your hand for any VH1 fans. So how does this work, and why do they think it will get people back?
I said that pop-up video thing exactly, and an editor took it out because he said no one would know what that was. Behind all of this is just how to get movie going to be exciting to young people. It's still down 30% or so from before the pandemic, 2019, when the move to streaming really picked up. And so this was kind of a test more than anything to see if people want to use their phones already, and they're doing it already, even though it's against the rules, could we come up with something that refocuses that urge to check your phone toward what's actually going on the screen.
So you do report about a recent test run of this during a recent showing of the horror film Megan in LA. How did people respond?
It was interesting to me. They were, at first they were a little puzzled, right? Even though this had been sort of like, there's a notice on the door that you could use your phone. So if anyone didn't want, someone would be surprised. But then at the beginning, a representative from Meta, Instagram, actually said, okay, we want you to take out your phones and you can use this. And they explained it. People kind of looked at each other, didn't really know what was happening. At first, people that I talked to who seemed interested, and as it went on, though, people kind of lost interest, I have to say. And so maybe that reflects part of the experimentation learning of the app more than anything. Who knows?
What about people who don't want to sit next to someone typing away on their glowing device? I mean, if this doesn't sound up your alley, it sort of sounds like if this rolls out nationwide, you'd still just kind of be stuck with it.
A lot of people don't want to be sitting next to someone on their phone, right? And when I talked to the theater chains, Regal and AMC, they were saying that they were open to the test, but it really needed to be advertised that this was a screening where people could use their phones. In no circumstances were they willing or even open to discuss this rolling out, to all screenings. So the other interesting thing about that is that some people who were interested in using the bot during Megan ultimately stopped using it. They told me afterwards because they felt awkward sitting next to someone who was not using it and didn't want to be seen like as a jerk with that light flashing every little bit. People were also not only using the bot. People were, as I kind of walked around and looked over shoulders, one person was doing a little online shopping, one person was on Wikipedia. If you can use your phone, you can use your phone.
Paying customers to see a movie. All right, Brooks Barnes, pop-up video. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Still to come, the songs heard around the world. Literally, we'll take a closer look at artists from 26 different countries competing in the Eurovision final. You're watching The Daily Report.